I guess even more needs to be said, and I do want to clarify some of the arguments just for the more nuanced people out there in the crowd. First off, I in no way want to suggest that there should be a one-to-one correspondence between something there called a gene and its expression in some sort of thing called a behavior. I If in any way that was a concern that people were having, I agree. Some of that talk is ridiculous. Here's the beef that I've been trying to have, which is when I hear people talk about rape and violence and all kinds of other things that we associate with social ills, and then they explain them away as the result of what had survival value or in some way was an evolutionary advantage that now in this context is expressing itself and we're critical of it, or that we can understand ourselves by understanding our genetic heritage and our evolutionary backdrop. As much as I would grant that, and I don't want to deny that, what I'm trying to suggest is that there is something called cultural evolution, which, even if continuous with natural evolution, is a difference of degree that becomes a difference of kind. Now, I'm going to reference two works really quickly here. One is, I strongly recommend that people go see the book called A is for Ox by Barry Sanders. This is a book that addresses gangs, gang affiliation, gang violence, and the way that it's associated with illiteracy. In fact, if you want to do a better predictor for whether or not a person is likely to get involved in gang activity or commit violent crimes such as rape, you'd be better off seeing whether or not that person is literate or illiterate than you would for, I guess, doing some genetic test about who was their great grandparent or something like this. I think the more that people understand that literacy is a very powerful force in shaping people's ability to consciously think about their own expressions, the way that they think about things and reason about things, it can become more critically capacitated, it becomes more reflective. Literacy is vital for detribalizing the human. I think there was a long epoch of tribal humanity, and then slowly that weaned into what we called publics. Publics were formed by individuals who were legislating each other and their own actions, and they were doing so through laws that were, I guess, governed, right? You sort of look at the slow development of history, you sort of from tribal and priestly power to kingly power and feudal system all the way up through nation states. I think what you find is a slow and steady development out of oral resonance and tribal life into the individual. And then by the time you get to the electric age, you're now dealing with masses, where there's a struggle between the mechanical age of the individuals and, again, a highly literate public of individuals, as opposed to now this electric aggregate mass that in some way, the further it goes, it's pushing toward a kind of tribalism. You can see it all through YouTube, where people flock around in tribe-like behavior, and it's sort of like what Fred was suggesting in his video on entertainment, that it becomes a way of gathering in a crowd around an idea, and it serves some tribalizing function. I think the point here would be that illiteracy is something that we need to deal with, and it's something that is, to me, a real concern. I think illiteracy is, the semi-literate and the half-literate are on the rise. Illiteracy rates themselves are on the rise, and what we mean by literacy is radically changing. To me, it is a concern, and it's something that we need to address, because there, not that I would suggest that there needs to be a speech gene or a behavior gene or something like a literacy gene. That's not the point at all. The point is that Our natural tendencies are not what we in the past have used to justify our behaviors. If anything, we have tried to grow ourselves against our natural inclinations, and that's been one of the beautiful things about civilization. Now, I'm going to end here. I want to cite a brilliant piece. This was published in Etc., the journal that is the Review of General Semantics, and this is the lead article that was published by Christine Nystrom in 1987, and it's called "Literacy as Deviance." Okay, and this is just a small little part here where she's trying to really put in historical perspective for people how radically unique the alphabet was, and how much Western civilization has grown out of the alphabetic principle. And even though it has transformed our world by evolutionary standards, it's a tiny little blip, and it's a vulnerable little blip. Listen to what she says here. She says, I am saying that reading and writing were radical departures from the ways of knowing for which we are biologically suited and in every waking moment of our lives still rely. 100 million years of evolution lie behind our ability to apprehend the world through our organs of sight and hearing. At least 20 million years of evolution lie behind our ability to augment and correct seeing and hearing through co-present speech. And all that lies behind literacy, this senseless, timeless, placeless world of abstracted thought, is a driving set of cultural needs for communicating across distance and time, and a primitive technology for doing it. It is important to understand that literacy is a kind of deviance from the human if we're going to do large-scale evolutionary history. That is, people have been speaking for thousands and thousands, tens and thousands of years, whereas when we start to look at what it means to be alphabetically literate, and we don't just mean, it certainly does mean the process of a person doing what Marianne Wolf calls depth reading, a good couple of hours a day of sitting down at one place and actually, for a good spell, focused on a text, right? It actually changes the neuronal structure in your brain. Your brain gets rerouted in certain ways. And I think maybe the more general point is that the better predictor for what people do isn't simply what is the evolutionary past. I think that, to me, is very problematic. To simply say that a person who commits violent acts had it in their genes, rather than say, we didn't culturally capacitate this person, we did not enable this person to both grow as a language speaker and to grow reflectively that way, and then to grow as a literate person. Going back to the Barry Sanders book, A is for Ox, so much of what he has to say there is that, the TV generation was so deadly, not only because it eclipsed book culture, but because it really eclipsed dialogue and interaction. So much of what is required for the literate mind to enjoy its literacy is a solid foundation in orality, wordplay, word puns, figures of speech that are make you giggle. This kind of stuff is very important. And then as that person later in life becomes literate, orality comes to bloom. I think that it is unfortunate that right now in the electric age, there are many people who are listening to videos rather than reading books. Notice this difference. When you're watching a video, you can hear what another person says, but you don't have to go through a speech production process as you're listening. You can just listen, and your throat doesn't move. When you read something, even if you read silently to yourself and your eyes are just moving over there, your throat and your speech production gear it mimetically walks through a speech production act in reading, and you're exercising articulacy skills as you learn to say things as others have composed them. When you just listen to another speak, you don't have to exercise that capacity for articulation. I wonder how many people are going to be left without a cultural inheritance because they've been left without the keys. That is, they're inarticulate, they haven't carefully grown their language and haven't grown in their own literacy, and as a result, they may resort to violent behavior. It wasn't something in their genes. It was the failure of us as a culture to help people become more reflective about their behavior, and literacy is vital to that kind of reflection. Okay, thank you.